So I want to talk to you about, for about 15 minutes, I want to talk to you about 5 back doors into policy work. Okay. Some of the work that you heard this morning were about large grants, and some of the work you heard this afternoon is about smaller grants and community-based strategies. And I want to talk just about, really quickly, about 5 projects I've been involved in that ended up having pretty interesting policy implications, but they weren't always through the front door. They were often through the door of evaluation research, right? Coming in through an evaluation to be able to speak back to a set of policy issues. And there's a lot of evaluation money available now. And just like Rod was saying, it's a very interesting vehicle to enter because you can widen the line of vision. It's often a very small line of vision. Did this intervention improve test scores? You can widen that to understand the implications of many of the interventions that are being funded these days. So let me talk, most of what I'm going to describe to you are participatory action research projects. Happy to fill in any of the blanks. For us, the way those of us here at the Public Science Project talk about PAR is that PAR is an epistemology, it is not a method. It's just a way of understanding that knowledge sits in varied bodies and that people who have been most oppressed by social circumstances have a lot of knowledge about social injustice. And it is our commitment to try to shape research that comes from that knowledge. So from there we borrow from Martine Barreau, who argues that research should privilege the perspective of those who have been most excluded. Having said that, however, we usually and often create what Maria Torre would call contact zones, groups of people who come together across very different positions, policymakers, administrators, privileged youth, people who have been in prison, high school dropouts, to come together to ask the question of what's up with youth-police relations in New York City, like you're asking. Right? So we create these contact zones, but we take very seriously the perspective that has been most marginalized. In 1994, President Bill Clinton signed the Violent Crime Act. By so doing, he removed Pell Grants from prisoners. Prior to then, Pell Grants were available to men and women in prison the way they were to men and women outside of prison. If you met the economic cutoff, you got financial assistance to go to college while you were in prison. 1994, he signed a grant. It was get tough on crime, take the TVs, the barbells on the college out of prison. He signed a grant that within a year we went from 350 college and prison programs in this country to 8. Right? So the light just went out. So within a very short period of time, there was a magic mobilization, the way sometimes mobilizations are, of college presidents, mostly women college presidents, community groups, church groups, and prison reform groups to bring college back to Bedford. Right? To this day, Pell Grants are still not available. Within a very short period of time, the women in the prison, this was their idea in the first place, said, we need to document the impact of college because we can no longer take it for granted. Right? There is federal policy that says people in prison cannot go to college. So we need to do a research project. Michelle, will you do it? And I said I'd be willing to do it if we could set up a participatory research project, educate the women in the prison to be researchers with us. And so that's what we did. 2 graduate students here, actually one at Harvard, Melissa Rivera, who had worked with me, and Rosemary Roberts went in. They taught a master's course in research methods. 15 women took the course. We had the mother question. PAR varies on how much the question is overdetermined from the front. So we had the mother question, which was, why have college in prison and what's the impact of college in prison? But then they crafted their own question under that question. Do you get it? So, right? So some looked at what's the impact on our kids? What's the impact on correctional officers? What's the impact for me, a woman who has been battered by my mom, by my boyfriend, by my brothers, who's never seen my own intellectual signature? So we had a substantial quantitative piece, and then we did interviews. We did interviews with women in the program, women who started the program, women who dropped out of the program. We interviewed their kids. And we decided to interview, the women inside said, you have to interview the correction officers. We gotta know what they think of this. And let's interview the ones we know who hate it, and the ones who know who love it, right? And then they said, well, let's interview women post-release. women who are already out to find out what difference did college make. Because again, these are women coming out of prison with murder on their record and also have a BA, and yet they were like getting jobs and keeping them. So it wasn't really like an employer said, oh, you've got murder on your record, but you've got a BA, great, come, right? So something deep internal was happening around education. So very quickly, really fast forward, 4 years of data gathering. All data were gathered by an insider researcher and an outsider together, except for the interviews with correction officers, where the women knew that they wouldn't tolerate, the officers wouldn't tolerate being interviewed by a woman in the prison, and obviously the interviews outside, which Maria Torre did. Short version, I remember because my dad was sick and I just needed to come to work because you know how like sometimes you just need to do something when you're sad. So I came to work and I got this envelope from the New York State Department of Corrections, and in it was the quantitative analysis, and what it said was of our sample of, I don't know, 1,200 who had not been in college and 300 or something who had, those who had not been in college had a 29.9% recidivism rate in 3 years. This is for women. About a third are back in. And for those who had been through college, it would drop down to 7.7%. And everybody, you know, those like you're just sad anyway, and then you're so happy, and then you're just crying in your office. Not in the bathroom, Tracy, in my office. And I thought, damn, we got to do a cost-benefit analysis on this one, right? Now we can even do this like, you could save tax dollars thing. It's not just a moral argument. It's not just good for the kids. Not just good for the women. It actually saves you money. Even conservative Republicans should think this is a good idea. All right, so we got the quantitative stuff. Then we interviewed the 20 women afterwards, and we said, what keeps you out, right? You've got these records. And they talked the way, how many of you know Paulo Freire? They talked in a way that would make Freire so excited, because they talked about how education gave them a vision of what was possible, a sense of who they were, a way to reflect back on the past and into the future, to think about the responsibility for their crime, for their children they left behind, for the children of the person that they hurt or killed, and that it was a transformative experience, right? And that they learned persistence and revision, all the things you heard about this morning. Persistence, revision, and to use logic and not emotion when you're pissed off, right? Because college can make you pissed off, as you all know. So it was an amazing piece of work. We had to do what Seema said. We had to think strategically about communications. We had to think about, we were writing in a deeply anti-prisoner climate. We still are, right? That's until we found Muslims again, right? So, so we had to figure out what kinds of products to create, and we created about 6. Together we wrote, I should have brought it, we made a very beautiful report. It's called Changing Minds. You can just go online and download it. It's got photos, it's got letters from women, from their kids, from the college professors whom we interviewed saying, I love this teaching. There was a woman who taught at John Jay. By day she taught in the prison, and at night she taught cops the same course, and like the women always did their homework and the cops didn't, and so she used to taunt them about that, right? So there were like letters and photos, and it's beautiful, and then it's got all this quantitative data and qualitative data, and then policy analysis, and then we did this cost-benefit analysis. But we needed a competent, single-voiced piece in that document, Changing Minds, which we sent to every governor in the country and every member of the state legislature in New York State. It came out on September 10th, 2001. So we had met with the folks at Newsweek who said, you know, unless there's an earthquake in California, you know, you're going to get really good coverage. So we sent it out that way. So these communication strategies, who are your allies? To what extent do you tie your research community-based organizations? To what extent are you in a deep way connected to youth organizations who are going to use the work, who are going to craft the questions? It seems to me those are the questions that we need to be asking. All right, thank you.